Товарищи, рабоче-крестьянская революция, о необходимости которой все время говорили большевики, совершилась.
December 25th, 1991. As much of the world celebrates Christmas, a different story is unfolding in the Kremlin. In a solemn, almost surreal moment, Mikhail Gorbachev signs a piece of paper that will end the world's largest socialist experiment, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Outside, the Soviet flag is lowered, and for millions, a lifetime of certainty is about to vanish. But for Gorbachev, this moment is deeply personal. Born in a small farming village, he once believed in the promise of socialism. Yet now, as he resigns, he is letting go of a nation he fought to reform, a nation his predecessors built through ambition and fear. How did the Soviet Union, this behemoth that spanned half the world, unravel so completely? Our story begins in the winter of 1917, during a time of upheaval. Russia's Tsarist regime, once seemingly unshakable, is crumbling. Imagine the streets of St. Petersburg, choked with desperate citizens. They are starving, weary from World War I, and tired of a government that ignores their suffering. Among these crowds are young, idealistic revolutionaries. They talk of a new world, a world where power belongs to the people, not the rich or powerful. At the forefront of this movement is Vladimir Lenin, a sharp-witted leader who spent years in exile, formulating a vision for a socialist state. By October, Lenin and his Bolsheviks stage a successful coup. The Russian Empire becomes the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, the first socialist state in history. Lenin's Bolsheviks have big plans. They aim to build a society where wealth is shared, where every citizen has a role and a purpose. In 1922, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, is officially established. It is, at first, a fragile idea held together by dreams and promises. Following Lenin's death in 1924, the Soviet Union falls into the hands of one of history's most feared leaders, Joseph Stalin. Stalin has a vision, too, but his vision demands control, discipline, and, above all, loyalty. He moves swiftly, reshaping the country through a brutal regime. Stalin is determined to transform the Soviet Union into an industrial powerhouse. He launches the 5-year plans, promising rapid growth. He dreams of steel plants, railways, and bustling factories. But there's a catch: Stalin's vision requires absolute control and the sacrifice of millions. Imagine the life of a worker in Magnitogorsk, a city built from scratch in the Ural Mountains. Every day, thousands of laborers toil in dangerous conditions, struggling to meet Stalin's demands. Any failure or delay is met with suspicion, even punishment. But the consequences go beyond the factory walls. Stalin's plans have a human cost that the world may never fully comprehend. When farmers resist collectivization, Stalin's response is ruthless. Millions are starved, imprisoned, or sent to labor camps. Entire families vanish into the Soviet gulags, accused of sabotaging the socialist cause. Take Nikolai and Elena Ivanov, a fictional couple symbolizing thousands like them. They lived on a small farm in Ukraine, struggling through the demands of forced collectivization. Their refusal to hand over their land marked them as enemies of the people. One cold night, soldiers came, and Nikolai was sent away, never to return. His story reflects countless real lives torn apart by Stalin's quest for absolute control. By the end of World War II, Stalin has shaped the USSR into a superpower. The Red Army emerges victorious from Berlin, and the Soviet Union stands at the forefront of a new world order. The Cold War begins, a standoff between two ideologies, two visions of the future, capitalism in the West and socialism in the East. The Cold War is a unique conflict. It's a war of ideologies, fought in proxy battles, space races, and arms build-ups rather than direct confrontation. The US and the USSR compete not just for power, but for influence over the hearts and minds of people around the world. In the 1960s, the space race captures the imagination of millions. Yuri Gagarin, the first human in space, becomes an overnight hero. His smile, his bravery, they all symbolize Soviet strength and innovation. Gagarin's success isn't just a victory for science, it's a victory for socialism. But not all victories are celebrated. The Soviet Union spends billions on nuclear weapons and maintains a sprawling military presence. In Vietnam, Korea, and Afghanistan, Soviet and American soldiers never face each other directly, but their governments pull the strings in bloody conflicts that reshape entire nations. By the 1970s, the Soviet Union has hit a wall. Leonid Brezhnev, now in power, leads with a cautious hand. His leadership brings stability, but it also brings stagnation. The economy is slowing, and the socialist dream is beginning to fade. For Soviet citizens, this stagnation affects every aspect of life. Imagine a young family in Moscow. They line up for hours to buy basic groceries. Consumer goods, if they arrive at all, are of poor quality. Soviet propaganda continues to promise a bright future, but people are losing faith. Corruption spreads throughout the system. Bureaucrats pocket bribes, factories exaggerate production reports to please higher-ups, and ordinary citizens turn to the black market. Jeans from America, foreign cigarettes, these are coveted items traded in secret, symbols of Western freedom. Meanwhile, the KGB watches everything. Any sign of dissent is met with harsh punishment. Dissidents like Andrei Sakharov and Alexander Solzhenitsyn risk their lives to speak out against the regime. But for most citizens, staying silent is the safest choice. Olga Petrovna, a fictional representation of many real individuals, is a schoolteacher who keeps a journal. In it, she writes her frustrations, her dreams, her hopes for change. She hides it under the floorboards because even writing these words is dangerous. Olga's secret journal is a window into the silent suffering of many Soviet citizens. By 1985, the Soviet Union is in dire need of change. Enter Mikhail Gorbachev, a leader unlike any before him. He believes in socialism, but he also sees the need for reform. His two boldest initiatives, Perestroika and Glasnost, are meant to save the USSR. Instead, they help bring it to an end. Perestroika, or restructuring, is Gorbachev's attempt to breathe new life into the economy. He loosened state control, allowing limited private enterprise. But years of rigid central planning are hard to undo. Inflation rises, shortages worsen, and citizens grow increasingly frustrated. Glasnost, meaning openness, is even more radical. Gorbachev allows greater freedom of speech and press, hoping this transparency will spark positive change. But instead, it opens the floodgates. For the first time, Soviet citizens can openly criticize the government. Imagine a Soviet family gathering around their television in 1988. For the first time, they watch a documentary detailing the horrors of Stalin's purges. They are shocked, horrified, and, perhaps, for the first time, truly questioning the foundation of their nation. As Glasnost spreads, so does the yearning for independence. In the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, citizens openly demand freedom. These movements spark similar uprisings across the USSR. On August 23, 1989, nearly 2 million people form a human chain across the Baltic states, symbolizing their desire for freedom. The image of this chain, a peaceful yet powerful statement, is broadcast around the world. It's a turning point, showing the strength of unity against oppression. Soon, other Soviet republics follow suit. In Ukraine, Georgia, and Armenia, citizens march through their capitals, waving national flags. These people are risking their lives for freedom, and Gorbachev faces an impossible choice: use force or allow the USSR to fragment. Take Arman, a young Armenian who, along with friends, organized peaceful protests. His passion for his heritage and independence echoed the desires of countless others. Arman and his friends represent a wave of youth inspired to demand autonomy. In August 1991, hardliners in the Soviet government make a desperate attempt to preserve the USSR. They launch a coup, detaining Gorbachev and declaring martial law. Tanks roll into Moscow, and the people hold their breath. Boris Yeltsin, the president of the Russian Federation, defies the coup leaders. He climbs atop a tank outside the Russian parliament, urging people to resist. His actions inspire the citizens of Moscow to fill the streets, standing against the coup in a courageous act of civil defiance. Imagine a young Muscovite watching Yeltsin's speech. The bravery he sees gives him courage, and he joins the crowd, knowing this may be the moment that changes everything. The coup fails within days, but the damage is done. Gorbachev returns to a nation slipping from his grasp. The republics begin declaring independence one by one, leaving the USSR a shadow of its former self. By December 25, 1991, the Soviet Union is effectively dissolved. Gorbachev resigns, and the Soviet flag is lowered for the last time. For some, it's a moment of triumph. For others, it's a loss of identity. The USSR, once an empire of ideologies, ambitions, and contradictions, is gone. The collapse of the Soviet Union marked the end of an era. Why did it fall? Was it the weight of Stalin's repressions, the economic mismanagement, or the unstoppable tide of nationalism? In truth, it was all of these, and more. Today, we still feel the effects of the Soviet collapse. In Russia, in the former republics, in global politics, the Soviet legacy endures. It's a story of ambition, idealism, and tragedy, a reminder of both the possibilities and perils of power.